What's Fee all about?
Oh boy, let me tell you about Fee. No, so Fee is out on all consoles: PC, Switch, Xbox, PS4. It is a 3D platformer made by Zoink Games, published by EA. I know EA, big bad, but they've published some good indie games here and there.
Unravel?
Exactly. You're actually right up there. Unravel and Fee are very similar, and the game is very much about its visual style. It's light on story. Fee actually, they drop you in with little to no fanfare about why you're there, how to play the game, or the world itself. You figure that out while you play, but even then, the conclusions you'll get at the end of the story are, they're not really there. It's very symbolic. There's no dialogue in the game. It's a very visual game. It's a 3D platformer that plays similar to something like Ukulele, but without the puzzles, without the collectibles. The whole point is you are this little animal known as a Fee, and you're exploring this world that's very colorful. A lot of areas, one area might be nothing but purple, one area might be nothing but blue, and it's all kind of crystalline and sharp edges and stuff. And you explore this world. You're guided by waypoints on your map, or if you hold down the sing button, you can bring up these little birds that show you the way to the next objective. You generally just follow the path, learning new songs from these different animals. And by learning new songs, you can sing, interact with different objects. I can't talk. Objects in the environment. So, like, one song might open up a flower that's a bounce pad. Another one might allow you to activate another flower that shoots you high up in the air with wind. Now that I'm saying that, a lot of things are very similar in this game. But the songs allow you to access new areas, kind of Metroid style. And besides that, you can kind of take a break and explore some of the bigger areas to find these pink crystals. And once you've accumulated enough, you can go to the big tree in the middle of the map, and they'll give you you'll learn a new ability. So you can climb trees, you can glide, you can run, all by collecting these pink crystals. The game itself is, like, if you follow the critical path and don't willy-nilly too much, just under 4 hours.
Wow.
I enjoy. It's a $20 game, and this is coming from Zoink Games. What was interesting to me is that Zoink Games, they made a game called Stick It to the Man, and that game is an adventure game that is full of dialogue, full of comedy, and Fee is so much not like that. It's a huge departure from what they've done before. There's no dialogue. It's very artistic. The music and the score is reserved. It kind of lets you feel the sound effects. When I was sitting there playing it at my buddy's house, he has this big surround sound system. I more often, the first time I noticed anything about the sound is I was like, hey, there is no music right now. But my friend chirped in and said, yeah, but it sounds like a waterfall right next to my head, because he has, the one stereo right there. And I turned around and, 10 feet off in the distance, there was a waterfall that I didn't notice before. And I was like, oh, okay, yeah. So the sound informs the world, but it's more of a relaxing, passive experience. There's not a lot of combat. There's actually no combat. The enemies, you just sneak by them. Otherwise, they look at you and capture you in a cage, and then you have to restart at the last checkpoint. The game is generally about following the critical path, learning these new songs, occasionally collecting pink crystals, and eventually reaching the end. I had fun while I was playing it, getting through, the whole game. It was nice to look at. Exploring around the area, honestly speaking, the landscape just isn't that interesting. Sometimes there's jumps that looks like you can make it, but then you can't, and the traversal is a little bit slippery, but it's fun. I would say Fee is a pretty game. It's a very pretty game. A lot of games in 2018 and late 2017 have been very visually interesting. But as far as the gameplay perspective, I didn't really enjoy exploring the world. It was nice to look at, but I didn't enjoy exploring it. I didn't feel the need to upgrade my guy with the pink crystals past the second ability they give you, because whereas the first two abilities are kind of mandatory, the latter ones, like the third ability I got towards the end of the game was, now you can run. And I was like, oh, okay, it doesn't really do much for me. But it's like a fun ride. You experience it, you play it, you spend $20 in 4 hours, you've had a nice time. But if you're looking to dig deep into something like a Super Mario Odyssey with tons of collectibles, there's not that much for you. Some really cool moments visually, more so than I would have even expected from an indie game like this. A lot of cool things they do with the world, but it's so. It's fun, but it's not going to blow your socks off.
It's a bit like Journey in the way, but more of a sort of a Journey execution presentation. But obviously the gameplay is more of a fun mascot platformer.
Yeah, so the most important thing to note about it is that it's less of a narrative driven game and it's more of like a platformer. It plays like a ukulele. It plays like something that is good but not insanely polished.
Mm.
And you it's more of a sightseeing thing. At any point, you can bring up your map and they show you this little green waypoint. It's like, hey, you're supposed to go there. And if you get lost like real bad, you can hold down the right trigger or the sing button, and then a little bird will pop up and lead you to the next place. So you always know where you're going. In Journey, everything is just straightforward. In Fee, every area is kind of open, and you're traveling around that area by using the guidance of the waypoint. So it's more easy to get lost. I think Journey is a more focused adventure.
Mm-hmm.
By the time you start it to end it, you feel like you've gone through a story. You feel like you've made that journey. Fee feels a little bit more personal in that. It attempts kind of the same artistic things that Fee does, especially in its big set piece moments. Or Journey, sorry, now my brain's getting confused. Fee attempts to do some things that Journey does better, and Fee does those things well. But ultimately, that's the problem with Fee. It doesn't know if it wants to be a super artistic, narrative-driven kind of experience that takes away player control, or an open-world platformer. And since it can't decide, it kind of settles for mediocrity or above mediocrity in both. And then, that's what you get. It's a good game to look at. Not the most fun game to play. And when speaking of content, I just saw a speedrunner who's, I guess the current world record is like an hour and 5 minutes. So you can zip around that game pretty quickly. I dilly-dallied a little bit, and I think my time was like 30 minutes and 30 or 3 hours and 30 minutes or something like that. So if you want to look for those pink crystals and investigate more, there's maybe 6 or 7 hours of content here, but it's still a $20 game.
So it doesn't really hit the mark. Is what it sounds like. It sounds like it's got a lot of. It's like I'm looking at some of the video and people can see right now. It's got a lot of nice ideas. It's beautiful look, like you said. We're getting a lot of these great sort of more polished. I mean, if we had an indie game revolution several years ago, now it seems like these indie games are hitting almost this mid-tier level.
Yeah, I've noticed that, and this is
The
something
journey
like
level.
that we'll talk about too with Crossing Souls. I see a lot of indie games that have a great visual style and the visuals save it. I think that if this game did not use that visual style that is very sharp and crystallized, each area is full of one color, it would just come across as kind of a mediocre platformer that has nothing to say. The story is symbolic, but it didn't push me in any sort of direction. It was I more observed it and was like, okay, that's an idea. But it doesn't seem like the story has much to say. And if it does, it's so metaphorical and so symbolical that it's going over my head. If you're looking for something cheap that's pretty to look at, and it is very pretty to look at, especially when you get these kind of big viewpoints, it's good. But there's always concessions, even though the game looks great, the camera is a little bit too zoomed in. You can learn new songs and open up new areas, but a lot of the songs kind of serve the same one-note purpose. Open up this flower, go through this barrier, whatever. It's not really improving your skill set as much as it's just allowing you to go through some sort of barrier of progression. And then the actual abilities they give you for collecting these pink crystals are things like, hey, you can glide. And it's, okay, that's useful in the beginning, but as you go further down, they're like, hey, collect 20 crystals. Your ability is now to run. It's like, well, that should have been given to me at the beginning of the game, in my opinion. But
wow, so it looks like it's quite polished. It's got a lot going for it, but it's not an essential play. It's just, if this is really up your alley, you might want to give this a try, but don't expect too much.
Everyone's going to have a little bit of a different, your mileage may vary, because if you like traversal, like actually moving around environments in games, Fee does some pretty cool things there. Like you can eventually, very early on, you learn you can climb trees. Like that's an ability you can do. You can climb a tree, and then eventually you get a glide, and you can jump from treetop to treetop, and it's really cool, and you're doing all these awesome things. But the problem is when you get in there and you get on the ground and you start investigating the actual depth of the world, there's not a lot there. It's a game that looks good in motion, and that's often what you're doing, is just moving through the areas. So if you're somebody who likes 3D platformers for cool jumps and stuff, you'll like Fee way more than somebody who likes 3D platformers for collectibles, environmental puzzles, combat, or any other sort of thing. It's kind of a bare bones game that has one focus and sticks with it, but wavers in quality on most of its features, except for the visuals. The visuals are great when the camera isn't kind of fighting you or too zoomed in. But you kind of hit it dead on the mark, Matt. It's not a vital play, but if you're seeing this video and it's speaking to you on some fundamental value, it's $20. the developer you're supporting is a good developer. I very much liked their Stick It to the Man game. If you're interested in kind of point and clicky adventure puzzly games, try that game out. It's cheap as all hell. But Fee is a good idea with some failed execution. I think I gave it a 7 out of 10 is I think what I put it at. I was somewhere between a high 6 and a low 7. So that's where I came out with it.
Just on the border. Well, it's not the next Journey, and it's not a ukulele, but it's an ambitious idea. Sometimes this happens. I think I like to see new ideas, and rather than just endless rehashes and remakes and remasters, which I also think remasters should be coming forward.
Yes.
So, but sometimes the new ideas, they don't always hit. So there it is. Like Matt says, if it speaks to you, go check it out. There's also a review on a90skid.com. People can check out if they want some more details about that. All right, how about Crossing Souls? This is like Dark Souls and Crossing the Street. It's like Frogger,
Animal Crossing.
Dark Souls.
Animal Crossing Dark Souls? No. Crossing Souls. Crossing Souls is a pixel arty. If you have any images, Matt, or something.
I'm putting up a video from your stream.
Okay, great. Potentially swear words. Who knows? Because this game is weird. It's a game that is obviously meant for adults, especially with the way they go towards this 80s nostalgia. But it's kind of weirdly offensive in the way it tells its story. And it doesn't know what it quite wants to be. So Crossing Souls, it's generally a derivative story, and its purpose is to be derivative. It's celebrating late 80s, mid 80s, early 90s storytelling, the cartoons, the movies of that generation. You're going to have references to Home Alone. You're going to have references to Back to the Future, Stand By Me. The game heralds its homages in these kind of vignette sections. And it really puts the forefront, hey, we're an 80s game.
Mm-hmm.
Behind that, you have the actual meat of the story, which is these 5 kids, led by protagonist, blue-haired Chris. They are starting their summer. One of the kids in the group is like, hey, I found this weird thing down by the lake. They go down there. It's a mysterious amulet and a dead body. Right there, the kids finding a dead body, Stand By Me reference. The amulet allows them to see into the afterlife, which is a dimension that's layered on top of them. And you can interact with the afterlife, and there's some gameplay stuff in there. But the main problem with this game is that it's about 10 hours. It sells it to you in trailers that it's a kind of top-down beat 'em up, like Zombies Ate My Neighbors sort of thing. The first 3 hours is nothing but text boxes. It plays more like a role-playing game. Actually, at one point, one of the characters walks up to somebody and goes, I'm sick of talking to all these people. What do you guys think this is, a role-playing game? And, for the previous 4 hours, it was nothing but kind of mediocrely written text. There's some funny stuff here and there, but the dialogue leaves a little bit to be desired.
Right, so that joke works really well if it's in the first 5 minutes. But when you set the tone of 4 hours of playing this, you're halfway through leveling up a paladin, and somebody goes in and be like, hey, what's this an RPG?
Yeah, exactly. It's 4 hours of building
kind of insulting
the story
to your time, really.
Yeah, well, the game picks up, and that's the weird thing about this is when I was, reviewing it, while I'm reviewing games, I like to leave notes and take notes as I feel them. And about 4 hours into the game, I, made a note that I was like, it's a game that probably would be awesome if it had gameplay. And then 4 hours into the game is when the gameplay comes in, the puzzles come in, things start doubling down, and they make more of a focus on the gameplay. But even then, you're if the story does not speak to you, which it probably won't, unless you're like a super fan of the 80s. It's just 3 hours of text boxes. The characters are kind of just there to be there. There's no real big story or background to any of them. You have Chris, who's the main character. You have his younger brother, Kevin, who is an annoying younger brother. You have Big Joe, who's a stereotypical black kid who wears a full basketball outfit, and his mom is like, oh, we had a terrible upbringing. Then there's Charlie, who is the girl from the trailer park. She was my favorite character because she was the fastest. And also, her ability, her weapon, I should say, it was like a whip. It had a really good hitbox to it. And then there's Matt, who is the
best
smart.
Yeah.
No, he's
hero.
Stupid. No, he's not. I wish. When I saw Matt in the game, I was like, my boy.
Right.
No, but he's like, the geeky kid who, now he has a blaster and he has jet boots. So it's kind of this ragtag group of misfits who go on this adventure. They find an amulet, and there's a big G.I. Joe-ass villain who wants it too. and it has a cute setup, but too often does Crossing Souls sacrifice its gameplay for a mediocre story that no one's really invested in. The best parts of Crossing Souls are these little vignettes. They're kind of like mini games. So it's hard to think because they're few and far between. I don't really want to spoil any, but there's a segment in which you're driving the DeLorean and you have to smash buttons to get up to 88 miles an hour. Okay, without context, not. But so there's little mini games in the game that reference, and when it's trying to be lighthearted, when it's trying just to celebrate that nostalgia, it's fun. When it tries to get serious or be dramatic or really tell any of its own ideas, it falters. And what you want is the gameplay. But even then, the gameplay is a little bit mediocre, and it's kind of. Here's the thing with Crossing Souls. Crossing Souls has way too many ideas for its own good. So each of those characters has unique abilities. You know, Big Joe can move heavy objects. Matt can glide over platforms that other people can't jump over. Charlie can dodge and stuff. But each character, the combat is never difficult enough to warrant switching between characters. At any times, it's not difficult. It's just cheap or unfair. So you'll just stick with one character who you think is the best. For me, it was Charlie. You'll play through until those people either aren't accessible anymore or, you know, somebody else is better for that situation. And then eventually you just kind of... it's one of those stories that just keeps going and going. It's more ridiculous and more ridiculous, but not in the good kind of way. And by the time the gameplay kicks in, it's already kind of overstayed its welcome. The gameplay is fun but basic. The puzzles start off pretty basic and then eventually get a little bit more interesting. But generally speaking, you're giving me this cute smile. Generally speaking, it's a 10-hour action adventure game that also wants to be an RPG. And in every indie game is going for that 80s nostalgia thing right now. And I think that was the thing that was most upsetting about it, is early on in the game, you leave your house. It's like the second thing you can do. You leave your house and you go in your neighbor's house, and there's a little girl with her hand against a static screen, and like there's things floating around her. Direct reference to Poltergeist. I'm like, oh, that's so cute. And then it spends the next hour trying to formulate a story that is intentionally cliche and intentionally not that interesting, and then doubles down on it instead of giving you the fun gameplay you kind of wanted.
We got a question from the chat. Crazy Cause says, yes, would it have been more impressive if it was released in the 80s?
Yeah. The visual style of it, the pixel art, and this is what I was saying with Fee, the pixel art saves it, man. If this game was 3D rendered, if it had 3D models, it probably wouldn't have spoken to people that much. The pixel art is great. It's kind of like Enter the Gungeon. A lot of detail, too, within the world. It feels like the world, like the art team and the narrative team were kind of separate from each other. The world and the areas around you are full of these references, these Easter eggs. There's tons of life in the environments. You can interact with things and read about them, and little descriptive blurbs will come up. But then the story being told within that world is cliche, uninteresting, etc. All the things I've already said. And then the gameplay issues are just far too many ideas for one game. So it's essentially a grab bag of mediocre content. But some content is fantastic. Like I said, those vignettes. The visual style is great. The audio is so. But it's one of those ones that looks super promising. It's from Devolver Digital. We all love that publisher because they're known for doing these wacky, self-aware kind of things. Crossing Souls starts off as self-aware and eventually gets too wrapped up in its own bullshit for its own good. Maybe it's being a little bit unfair to call it bullshit, but I was expecting a more lighthearted story, and what they gave you was a cliche story with some bad attempts at drama. And then the gameplay surrounding it is serviceable, but you have to make it through like 5 hours of mediocre written dialogue to get there. So it's like... It's
not the next Undertale.
Definitely not. It was attempting to be. Like how Undertale... And that's the thing. This game in the first 4 hours feels like an RPG, but instead of using turn-based combat, they just go for, smash the button, dodge away. And then eventually, 6 hours into the game, it's nothing but that. And there's not a lot of dialogue. And then the end of the game, they come back to the dialogue. So it's almost like a game in 3 parts, where Act 1 is nothing but exposition and a little bit of moving around the world. And then the middle of the game is all that gameplay they left out of the rest of it. And the end is like a hurried up kind of, let's finish this story in a weird way. I had fun in places, but it's too long to recommend to a casual fan. Unless you have a die-hard love of the 80s, the story won't speak to you. And the gameplay is basic and a little bit challenging. to a point of frustration at times.
The entire time you've been talking, I've had this video up from your first episode, and it's just been nothing but
text.
Dialogue, text. I think so this Christopher guy with his ginger hair, like long paragraphs and paragraphs of text. Like this is, I'm getting flashbacks to the dream sequences, the memory sequences of Lost Odyssey, because Sakaguchi, who produced and directed Final Fantasy games, left to make Lost Odyssey and went back to writing. And nobody was going to tell him, Mr. Final Fantasy,
not to do that.
That's a bit long and redundant, don't you think? No.
Well, and here's the thing: is the first night I streamed this 2 nights. The first night, I forget who was. Somebody was in there with me. Maybe Kazi was in there with me, and it was 2 hours of just dialogue.
Were you reading the text?
In the beginning, I was reading. I can read very quickly, and I was kind of... I wanted people to be able to read as they went, but around maybe the first hour, I think it was... The second stream I did, I said, I'm just going to skip the text as fast as I can read, and if you can't keep up, I'm sorry.
Right.
Because 2 hours, and I felt like I had made little to no progress in the game. Nothing had really happened that was interesting story-wise. And by the time I finished my second stream, which was also like an hour and a half, I felt like, okay, this is what this game is. It's just nothing but dialogue with this kind of weird action-adventure background. And then once I decided to stop streaming it is when the gameplay actually got decent. But that's the point. If I stream a game for 4 hours and it's just nothing but kind of poorly written dialogue, you can't expect somebody, unless they're really invested and it's the only game they have the money for, to go through all that and to get to your gameplay. Mm-hmm. It needs to sink its hooks into you. And if the 80s nostalgia hooks don't do it, I'm sure you can see little references in the dialogue, maybe while moving around, some little references here and there. But it's just so front-loaded with exposition and stuff that's just not great. If it was all Undertale written level and it was all that funny, I would be completely fine with it.
Sure, but I mean, Undertale gives you combat right away, it gives you puzzles, it gives you, you're buying items, and they're constantly switching it up. I mean, like... Balancing story and gameplay is a problem we had, I don't know, like when CDs first came out, and the Sega CD was struggling with that mix, but we've had a long time to get this straight. And it's okay. Are you going to be a text adventure, or are you going to be a game? But you need to be able to pace and organize this stuff a lot more. It seems like that's the main problem, is the pacing and balance.
Since people have been seeing this video and have now experienced what I mean.
Yeah.
When you finally get a break from all of this text, it might be to fight 3 or 4 enemies. Like the first thing you do, combat-wise, is go to a diner, and the guy's like, hey, we have a problem in the basement. And I'm like, you're going to make me fight rats, aren't you? And then you go down there, you fight rats, and it's cheeky. And you're like, that's cute. But that's the only gameplay you get. And then it's another 45 minutes of dialogue. And when the gameplay finally comes into its own, at its very most, it's cheaply frustrating. And at its very best, it's really just hit 2 times with your whip, dodge away. Hit 2 times with your whip, dodge away. And you have a stamina meter associated too, so you can't just mash buttons. The gameplay reward you get for sitting through all of this dialogue isn't the best. But what keeps it alive are those interesting vignettes, those little movie references. But if you didn't grow up in the 80s, if you don't know Poltergeist, Home Alone, Back to the Future 3, Stand By Me, if you don't know those 4 titles...
You're a
like
loser.
Kind of in the back of your mind, it's nothing to you.
Okay.
This is nothing to you. Power Rangers are not going to come down in the sky in the middle. Like, it's not that straight up. So it was a game that I really was hoping a lot more for, and kind of fell flat. Once again, visuals save it.
Kind of reminds me of Read Only Memories 2064. It was another 80s thing. It was supposed to be inspired by Snatcher, Cyberpunk, a visual adventure style, point and click, solve the clues, and it was so much dialogue off the bat between a robot and one character forever. Just kept going and going and going. And there were never, because Snatcher had like 5 characters within the first 5 minutes, and the dialogue was short and snappy and provided actual characterization, which is what you need to do. And it's not seen before you get called off for an emergency. Whereas this one went on forever. Long monologue with a robot, long monologue with a character pushing, I guess, gender identity politics in a way that was just way too in your face, not interesting, probably make anybody uncomfortable with it. Yeah. And it was just, like I really wanted to love that so much. And when you look at this game at the first, wow, it's got such a great, it's so beautifully drawn.
It looks
such a great
awesome
idea.
to look at.
But then
Yeah.
I just watched this guy with the ginger guy with the sideburns talking for like, good for kids to learn how to read, I guess.
Well, and that's the thing is that the game, it almost has this lighthearted adventure that would be for kids. The game is rated teen. They say, well, they don't say the F word, but the text is in there. It's a little too violent for kids. You know, you have this big hulking GI Joe enemy, or he's your main villain called Major O. Russ. And throughout this time, you know, he's trying to get the amulet from you. There's a section where he orders his soldiers to shoot at you.
Mm-hmm.
And one of his soldiers says, yeah, but aren't these kids? They're kids. And he says, I don't give a fuck, and shoot them. And I'm like, okay, so this is obviously for adults. It's not for kids because there's way too much reading. It's like this fluctuation of tones, and excuse my French, but there's this fluctuation of tones, and it just doesn't make sense. What this game is this is sad, but if you want a game that does better to the 80s and is a better game overall, get on your phone and play Stranger Things the game. It's sad that a licensed property, no matter what, even though it's Stranger Things, a licensed property free mobile phone game can replicate the 80s and give you better gameplay than a $14 or $12 PS4 game. That's what was silly to me. In Stranger Things, the game also does that. There's a lot of dialogue, a lot of characterization, but the point is it has a story to tell.
Mm-hmm.
Crossing Souls says nothing. I don't know what they were trying to say. I don't know what they were trying to get at the end. It's all cliche, and you could say it's intentional, but if someone makes a derivative story intentionally derivative and intentionally cliche, but it doesn't make you laugh or like wink with it more than a few times, is it good or is it just cliche and derivative, right?
Yeah, it just sounds like they could have used a bit of editing. It sounds like a good rough draft.
This game would have been better if they would have cut 2 hours off the beginning, added some more stuff in the beginning, like you said, so you get some gameplay, mix the gameplay and story, and then remove some of their more overtly offensive ways of creating drama. If I were to say how they do it, it would be straight spoilers, and a week after the game, I'm not going to. Mm-hmm. But for a game with literal children, one of the characters says, I'm going to be 11 years old, or I'm going to be 12 years old soon. When you identify them as children, there's certain places you shouldn't go with your story. There's certain violent content you shouldn't be showing that has to do with children. And that's it's something I struggled with. Was I being too sensitive? And then I said, if you removed the pixelized art style and made it realistic, this game would have been banned in some ways. Like, that's where it goes to in some ways. And so maybe it's me being sensitive, but I'm not going to celebrate a kind of story that to try and get cheap drama does some messed up things with kids in the scene, So that's all I'll say on that. But interesting ideas, much like Fee. But Fee is less offensive in less more original, I'll say.
Actually, another great 80s game if you want something that's a lot darker and more suspenseful, Stories Untold.
Yeah.
The opening credits on that go for a real total Stranger Things ripoff, but the actual gameplay in it, if you like point and click puzzle adventure and you want to be thrilled and have chills and you don't like jump scares, it's a fantastic, amazing game.
Stories Untold. That's all the new stuff I was playing. So you've been playing Prey, huh?
I've been playing a lot of Prey, and I played a game called Virginia, which came out about a year ago.
It's been a little bit longer than that. I think 2 to 3, maybe? I did a video review for my podcast, and when I was doing that must have been at least a year and a half to 2 years ago. Yeah, it's an older game, but it's a goodie, in my opinion.
New for me, and I think I got it for a really good. No, I didn't. Actually, I paid maybe $15-20 for it. I'll tell you what, this game, the first 3/4 of it, I was so impressed. This is let's call it a walking simulator, but it is told entirely without voiced dialogue or written dialogue. The only words you see are written down.
The music is fantastic.
The music is fantastic. It's constantly playing. They time your movements through the environment so that it's not necessarily like when you step on a certain spot, it'll switch, but it'll be timed with the music. So you could be, you could be a few steps over to the left or the right. Also, all the cuts and all the edits are done like a film. They're all crossfades, dissolves. So it has I've never really played a game like it before. I was so impressed with everything it did as it set up this mystery, as it set up multiple characters that you cared about, and you were doing a little bit of problem solving, crime detectiving, that kind of thing. And then all of a sudden,
it just goes off the rails.
Yeah, the plot goes, I guess you could say, David Lynch territory, where
that's the best thing. That's what I compare it to. It's David Lynchian in that so weird that it's got to be symbolic, but I don't really even feel like thinking about it.
That's it. It's going for a weird symbolicness. It becomes very nonlinear. There's a lot of areas where your interpretation and my interpretation of it could be completely different. Yeah. I guess, and the developer of the game wanted that. That was his goal. They wanted it to be was that a dream? I don't know. Was that a dream? Would you think that's a dream? For me, that doesn't work at all, especially because the first 3/4 of it were so easy to understand and were so powerful, and I was so hooked, and then I felt like it just ripped me right out of it. Like when you watch a David Lynch movie, they generally are weird right off the bat, and they
don't bury it.
Yeah, and I think that you need to set the tone properly, and it just felt like too much of a kind of like your problem with Crossing Souls, where it went one way for so long, and then they flip around on you, and it's just, I got really confused with it, and I was really let down. But it was such a great idea and so well executed. But if you like the idea of nonlinear storytelling and you want to come up with your own story, or what could that have meant? Yep. Was it a drug trip? Was it a dream? Was that the past? Is that the present? Then you're really gonna love it. But if you're looking for if you're more of a traditionalist, old fuddy-duddy like me, who wants it to be the same way the whole way through, like I'm all for weird stuff, but I think it should have been, the tone should have been set earlier on.
Here's the thing too, is for someone like me, and this is me speaking to my reading audience as much as my YouTube audience, I originally gave this game a 9 out of 10 when I reviewed it, not for a 90skid.com, but the reasons Matt just said, the kind of throwaway ending where they do like, oh, look at how weird it is, kind of to shock you and surprise you, but they never close it off. Yeah. That's the reason that a game like Edith Finch got a 10 and Virginia did not, because Virginia, it perfectly encapsulates what a narrative-driven game can do. It can replicate the feeling of being in a movie, having agency over a character and feeling invested while still kind of watching something that doesn't have a lot of gameplay in it. But if you flub the story, and like Matt said, if you go on one path so long and then take a weird J turn at the end and don't explain it to your audience, you're gonna lose a full point for that, especially when it's the whole focus. With something like Edith Finch, which wasn't a 10 out of 10 to Matt, but was to me, I think this is what I think a perfect game, in my opinion, at least for that genre, would be something like Edith Finch that used the visual style of Virginia. It's hard to put Virginia into words because, like Matt said, it's very visual in the way that movies do it. And I think that was the most striking thing about Virginia to me. You know, at one point you leave your apartment and you're walking down your apartment hall, and the music comes to a head, and then it cuts real fast, and your character is still moving, but you have been instantly transported inside of your work or another place. And it's those very smart cuts and those very cool ways they use the camera and use your perspective that make the game so special, but just the utter failings. And I think the story you wouldn't call the story an utter failing if it didn't have such an interesting and cool setup. Virginia is fun. It's also super short too. Like even compared to Edith Finch, which Edith Finch is like what, 2-ish hours? I feel like Virginia was like maybe an hour, maybe less.
Virginia is about 2 hours, yeah.
Okay, then maybe, yeah, it's been a while since I played it, but Virginia is like you said, it's the David Lynch of narratives-driven games, but they just needed to either double down on the Lynchianness or they needed to fill out some closure in their story.
Yeah, I felt ripped off with it, and it's too bad because if it would have stuck with the more traditional style, it would have been one of my favorite games I've played in a long time, and I would have championed it to a lot of people.
If you get this game for like $5 on Steam, I think that's the perfect price.
Yeah, I felt ripped off paying 15 for it, to be honest.
Yeah, that's what I would say for how little they give you in as far as replayability. Once you've seen it, you've seen it.
Yeah.
And with
Well, there's probably a few other things you could go back and investigate and look at clues, but it does kind of push you along at a certain pace for a lot of things.
Yeah.
I was surprised. There are a lot of moments that give me chills. And having control over something as opposed to, say, watching a horror movie, you have to move your character forward into danger. So it can be that can be really exhilarating too. I just have never had an experience like that with a game where I love it, and then all of a sudden, what is happening here? Kind of reminded me of watching the movie Sunshine, which is like such a great sci-fi ambient. We're going to the sun, and then the last bit of it, I won't spoil for anybody, but it completely changes into an entirely different genre.
I think Virginia, I was trying to think of something that might replicate what Virginia does. If you've ever played Layers of Fear, the way that the game Layers of Fear, you might see a door, turn around to look at the rest of the room, turn around, that door is no longer there. They're doing it to incite fear and claustrophobia. Virginia uses those same tricks, but to be imaginative, to put those Lynchian things. The one thing, like I said, I haven't played this game. I couldn't tell you the main character's name if I tried. But the one thing that sticks out to me is there's like a scene where you're reading a journal or something, and you look up and look around, there's nothing, and you look back down at the journal, and then you look up, and there's just like a giant water buffalo in your room. And like that is similar to the way that Layers of Fear or other games use your perspective to surprise you, but instead of being about something that's scary, it's one of those, like you said, Lynchian, what? Why is there a water buffalo in my room?
Yeah.
And that's when the game starts to kind of descend down into that madness.
Because when that stuff first starts appearing, I was still hooked into it, and I was willing to accept, okay, because of it's a story of people that are missing. I thought,
hoping for a good payoff.
Yeah, I thought, okay, well, maybe it'll be some kind of supernatural thing. And that's a very North American and European style, Western European way of looking at stories. Every story has to have a definitive resolution. Whereas if you look at storytelling in like Sweden, wherever the people from that make Inside and Limbo are from, their culture and their history, things don't have to have a resolute ending. They don't have to have a good ending. They can just sort of end like life does. But this is just so... it's just so different from how it starts that I felt betrayed.
I don't know if I invented, that's such a pretentious word. I don't know if I invented this genre and I've just said it for so long that I think it's a thing, or if it's a real thing. But that style of storytelling, I call it naturalistic drama when in reference to film. So if you've ever seen a movie like Place Beyond the Pines, more art housey movies where it's not always about intro, rising action, climax. It's just a story told from point A to point B within a world. And it doesn't necessarily have to give you closure, give you intro. It's just showing you instead of telling you almost. And I feel like that's what Virginia does. The naturalistic, or at least what I like to call naturalistic drama. It doesn't necessarily follow rising action, falling action, climax. It just has the story to tell you from point A to point B. And I think, like you said, if they would have paid off on some of those weirder things with a more North American, Western European kind of storytelling, I think it would have been for a better thing for the story.
Or started like that.
Or just go completely batshit insane. Do a David Lynch from the beginning, and then I'll be in it.
Yeah.
All
right, that's what I had with that. I've also been playing Prey. I'm about 8 hours or so into it now.
I saw a tweet that you sent out at GameThinkTalk, if you guys want to follow Matt, something about you wish that developers would put in a male and female voice line.
Like a sample at the beginning, because when I was picking the character, like that's
what I wanted to ask you.
When I was going to play Mass Effect, the reason I chose the female Shepard is that I went on YouTube.
She's way better.
I watched a couple cutscenes, yeah, and she's amazing, one of the greatest.
Yes.
So I picked the femme Shepard, and I was trying to do the same with this one, but I was worried about spoiling things. So yes. I was trying to lay off. Turns out they don't really say too much, although actually I believe the voice of one of the robots is your main character. So I'm not sure.
There's some dialogue, but it's not like they're spouting off one-liners Duke Nukem style, or even interacting with characters as much as you do in Mass Effect.
Yeah, because in Mass Effect, because it's your character that is speaking so much, I feel more of a connection to it. Whereas even if I'm not even sure, even if her voice is doing one of these robots, I still feel like that's the robot. And our character actually is pretty much voiceless for most of it. But anyways, I can see this game. I was so shocked. I saw that it got a 6 out of 10 on GameSpot. and
Yeah, some people were not liking on it.
they cited shallow story, early difficult grind,
Eh,
and now I think that this is a game that is probably harder to review, and that's how I wanted to ask you about it, because I think
yeah.
for me it's a game. It's made by Arcane. They made Dishonored 1 and 2. It's Harvey Smith, who also worked on one of the Deus Ex games, the worst one,
Yep.
unfortunately. But it's from that BioShock, System Shock, Deus Ex.
That's why it was so hard to review, because everyone's going to
Yeah.
go in with different expectations. If it tried to put itself, they sold it kind of as a horror game, takes place in space. What it is like you said, it's a Deus Ex game. Every objective has three different ways to go about it. The very
At
first thing you do,
least,
it's like
at least.
the very first thing they do is they say, "Hey, there's this room you need to get into as a key card, right? And you can either go through the vent, stealthy, find the key card, or pickpocket it. There's your, finding the key card, or you can hack the door. Like, it always gives you an option. And I think for players who are looking for that kind of thing, Prey speaks to them way more than somebody who wants a BioShock. And that's the thing too. Prey feels very much like a System Shock, or people keep saying it's System Shock because it's BioShock in space, but there's a certain tone that BioShock has to it,
Yeah.
in relation to how it tells its story and how it embraces its characters, that Prey borrows. So what you get is you get a game that's a lot about in experimenting as the player, crafting things, trying new things, but you have this story that kind of feels more like a linear single player thing. It's a game that I think a lot of people went into expecting a standard first person shooter, and what they got was a very complex thing. And so when you hear things, people talking about light story, I think the beginning of Prey is one of the most ingenious openings to a game and ever.
Yeah.
And for someone to say that the beginning story is light, maybe the actual amount of words they say is light, but the amount of atmosphere that you get in that opening is so much. But I think Prey is just one of those games that has so much content. It comes down to you as a gamer. Are you someone who likes to be told where to go and what to do and how to do it? Are you someone who likes to explore? Are you someone who likes to get everything told to you in a story, or do you like to infer it from the environment? Prey is an open world game. That's what I feel like a Prey is. It's an open world game that doesn't seem open world because it's single player. You know what I mean?
Absolutely, yeah.
There's a lot of options. There's a lot of ways to go about things.
I mean, the thing with it is that a lot of the story you could easily miss. There are so many side sections that
read this thing, read that,
or even rooms there's entire areas that you don't have to go to that contain 3 or 4 different rooms that I've spent hours in poring over, dealing with enemies in unique situations.
I'm gonna forget, Matt. I don't know if you've reached it yet, but when you get to, it's kind of like a lounge area. There's a diner, like the break room area.
Yeah.
Because you're saying that you can skip over areas. Do not skip that area. It's wherever the lounge is, where people on the ship would come to like relax.
Okay.
That whole area is some of the best writing, some of the best side quests. But like you said, you can just sneeze and skip over it.
Absolutely. I was really surprised at some of how big of these areas that I'd spent so much time. And I'm not just talking about you pick up a couple of audio logs and then there was a story that was in the room. Like, I'm not serious things that are happening
quests
that are wonderful. And like Arcane is so good. Harvey Smith is so good at this ambient environmental storytelling. He's like the best since BioShock did it. And it's the reason why I love Dishonored, even though I would never say that the main narrative in Dishonored is any good, but it doesn't matter because it's about the levels that you visit and the things that you do there. The enemies are very, very difficult to deal with. But
I was just going to say that I feel like that's a big thing. People don't want to chill around because despite Prey being about shooting guns, it's more of a survival game. It's like Resident Evil. You never have enough ammo unless you use an ammo duplication glitch. Your resources are always super small. So the idea of sticking around an area and the enemies can be anything in the environment is so different from the gameplay.
Well, that adds, I'd say that you have open areas where there's going to be a lot of enemies. You have some middling areas. It's kind of like access points where you think, okay, I got to keep on guard. And then you have some safer spots that you hop into where at first you want to sweep the room and anything could be an alien. But I think there are still lots of areas where you can feel safe. They
I
still.
was gonna ask you, did you, that game early on definitely gave off a lot of horror game vibes, and those slowly kind of dissipated. How not how scared were you, but like, did you feel those horror vibes, or were you always like kind of more sci-fi? Because when it starts off, it's very like almost alien in the way of you don't know what's going on.
Yeah, I definitely felt more of the horror earlier on, and then you kind of get relaxed. Once you figure out, I mean, I still jump every time. What they do something great. Whenever it's been quiet for too long, all of a sudden the whole ship will kind of shake. And there'll be like a big thump. You don't know what it is, but they do a great job with the sound design of letting you know when there's an enemy there. And like they have this great combat music that comes in. It doesn't even really sound like music. And it's, and then I get comfortable and then it shocks me again. So far, I've only had one jump scare and I totally was not expecting it at all. It has to do with, I don't want to spoil it, but it has to do with calibrating a screen.
Oh, okay. I think I remember what you're talking about. Yeah,
and it's actually the people that were watching, I was just going around smashing all this glass with a wrench and they were worried that I was going to ruin it. And then I go up there and start messing with it. And it's, man, I really love, like, I can totally see the points in some of these lower reviews of, okay, yeah, it's got, I guess, a thin narrative, but I have really enjoyed the story and all the little bits that coalesce to tell the story. The enemies are difficult, but I really wouldn't want it any other way. When I first played this and I was looking at all different modifications to do, I'm like, I would never upgrade any of my physical stuff because I'm so used to first-person AAA, third-person AAA games. You never worry about dying. It's just regenerative health, and you just kind of bang your way through. But the enemies are so difficult in this, I might actually do that. Tough. It also means that, and there are actually, sometimes you play a game and you've got all these upgrade points and you look around and you go like, I don't want any of these skills. Almost all of these ones seem really useful. They're
super awesome.
Yeah. They're not only useful because the enemies are so difficult, but they're useful in a way that if I combine a couple of them in a way, I could deal with the enemies in a really satisfying way, go from being terrified of them to like being really overpowered at them. But it's not just in a way of like, there's so much you can do, and you're, like you said, it's like a survival game, and when you never have enough to get to that point, there's a certain resource to make these neuromods, these upgrades for yourself that's so rare, and eventually you encounter a choice where you can basically sacrifice a human life to get it, or not, and they give you so many different ways to play with that choice, and I just think it's just what I used to love about games, what I think is getting lost in a lot of games that are hand-holding.
Choices that matter, that truly matter.
Yeah.
Matt's sugarcoating it because he doesn't want to spoil anything. But generally speaking, you have the option to get a lot of really cool abilities in this game, but the consequence of it is not like you're going to lose $5,000. The consequence is a morale one.
It's kind of like Bioshock in that way with getting Adam and the Little Sisters.
Exactly, but on a very bigger scale, because it's not just, I got this amount of Adam and I can buy this amount of upgrades. It's a completely different tree that allows you to do completely different things. And I think at the end of the day, that's what Prey does the best. It gives so much player choice, not just in how to approach objectives, but how you want to play. Do you want to be stealthy? Do you want to go for a bunch of weapons with all the crafting and stuff? They really give so much player choice. And even when the game was broken, this is something because Prey and The Surge were the two games that actually were broken when I first reviewed them. Prey was good enough that I tried for like 4 hours to fix it. The Surge was good enough that I tried for 4 hours to fix this game-breaking bug, never found an opportunity. Prey was good enough that when I couldn't find a fix for the bug, I reloaded a save from 3 hours ago and then played through it, but just in a different way.
Exactly, yeah.
And I think that's what speaks to Prey the most. If you go in, you grab a pistol, and you're like, I'm going to shoot the aliens and play this like a first-person shooter, you're going to give it a 5 out of 10. You're not going to enjoy it because you're not digging into what the game does best, and that's providing a super fleshed out experience for every kind of gamer. And the fact that they can even come close to succeeding with that speaks volumes to what Arcane can do as far as first person.
I want them to have a Deus Ex game so bad, or just make a Cyberpunk game, because I mean, let's face it, no one's really in love with Adam Jensen as a character. He's usually the worst.
Adam Jensen's the kind of guy who listens to Linkin Park in reverse, but only in his apartment late at night. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, sure. Thinks he's deep, but he's just a freaking weirdo.
Exactly. Yes, and that's such a problem with so many. I think that's why I like Prey and your protagonist is although they have their own face, they are kind of reserved. You can find yourself in the feet of the main character. They're more of a Master Chief, less of a somebody who's a big character in single player games. I don't know. I'm losing my train of thought.
Well, they're more of an avatar of you.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that succeeds. Prey is something special, and whenever they make Prey 2, that's funny because this was originally supposed to be Prey 2. Actually, originally this was a System Shock game. They just couldn't get the license for it. I don't know if you knew that, Matt, but this was developed as System Shock 3, and they could not get the license for it, so they called it Prey instead. Does that blow your fucking mind?
The funny thing is that calling it Prey, I think, got more people angry than excited. Well,
because the original Prey is about being a Native American who gets abducted by aliens, and then you spirit walk into the Native American spirit world.
They never should have called it Prey. That was so stupid. That was so dumb idea.
I think the original Prey 2.
They should have called it Cloverfield.
Wow, right there. There you go. There you go. So Prey, you've been enjoying it. How many hours you got in it?
Last stream I did like 6, and then maybe 2 or 3 before that.
Remember it being about 30, 40 hours, depending on how much you willy-nilly. But then again, I had to go back, and when I did that 3-hour previous save file, I skipped some of the side quests again, so my final time could have been skewed. But it's pretty decently lengthy. I liked Prey quite more than I thought I was going to.
Yeah, I can see it's like with Breath of the Wild. I can see the reasons why people wouldn't like Breath of the Wild, if they want dungeons, if they don't like inventory, if they don't like weapons breaking. Yeah. But the magic of Breath of the Wild speaks to me in the same way that Prey does. If you like BioShock, Deus Ex, System Shock, Dishonored, if you like that environmental storytelling,
this is up your alley, for sure.
This is going to be so good for that. All right, I think that's going to do it.
Real quick, just before anyone goes, if you haven't played Telltale's Borderlands, Tales from the Borderlands.
Right, okay. One of the funniest games I've ever played. Probably the funniest game.
I've played a lot of Telltale games, and we talked about Tales from the Borderlands. We did a video
we ranked all the Telltale series. Yeah, so check that video out.
Well, we ranked a certain amount of them because we hadn't played through all of them. We'll
all the good ones.
Revisit. Yeah, I think it was like Wolf Among Us and Batman. Some of them were in there, Guardians of the Galaxy, etc. We'll have to definitely go back. But the thing that struck me was I've been playing a lot of Telltale games to review for the site. Guardians of the Galaxy, specifically Batman Season 2, which has been lackluster. Before that, Walking Dead Season 3. Those are the Telltale games that I've reviewed for a 90s kid. And then when you go back to something like Tales from the Borderlands, which is older Telltale, it's got huge voice actors like Nolan North, Troy Baker. There is a level of passion in their performance. There is a clear-cut cinematography. You could tell who directed each episode. It's weird to go back, and I've been okay with how Telltale has handled some of their more recent things, just because they've been on this downward spiral, and I think I've gotten used to it. But going back and playing Telltale's Tales from the Borderlands made me hate the newer ones more than anything else, because Telltale, it's a negative way to look at it. Telltale's Borderlands is, like Matt said, one of the funniest games of all time, one of the most surprising games of all time, a greatly written story, and it's already in an existing universe.
And you don't have to I've never played Borderlands. I don't think Borderlands looks interesting, and it doesn't matter. The writing is so bang on. I've never once felt the story lost me. Any moment, and this happened several times, where the characters would say something odd, or I would pick a choice. I'm like, that's a really stupid choice. Why would anyone say that? The characters would say to me, that's a dumb thing to say. Why would you ever say that? And they're so connected.
There's such a tongue-in-cheek way of if you've played Borderlands before, you know when they introduce new villains, they'll be in a cutscene, so it'll be like a guy who walks up and be like, I'm Big Bad, and then all of a sudden a very stylized backdrop will come up with their name and stuff like that. And what they do in the Telltale's Borderlands game is, like, when they introduce new characters, they'll play off that. So like last night I was playing and they introduced this new character, and he's all like does his pose, and the backdrop comes out, and the backdrop goes away, and he's still looking at the invisible camera. And then the other character, Fiona, one of the main characters, is like, what are you looking at? So it understands. It's self-aware. And then you have, like, Batman Season 2, where you play as Batman for literally 40 seconds. And you're like, okay. Telltale was so good at taking existing properties and making them into awesome narrative-driven things, and
A
it feels
few
like
times.
somewhere along the way. Well, Tales from Borderlands, Wolf Among Us. Go watch the video.
Walking Dead 1.
Yeah, Walking Dead 1 specifically.
But I don't think
yeah,
Game of Thrones is all that great.
Game of Thrones sucks.
Back to
No,
the
it's not good.
Future, Jurassic
Back to the
Park.
Future. Well, that's the thing too. Back to the Future is super old Telltale when it was less about narrative and more
When
about
that engine
puzzle
was
games.
new.
Yeah, when they were trying to rebirth the puzzle, a point and click genre.
Mhm.
That's what they were trying to do with Jurassic Park and Back to the Future. But definitely go check out that video if you guys like Telltale games, and if you like Borderlands or haven't played Tales from the Borderlands, definitely pick that up. I think it's like free with Xbox Live Gold. You can get it for cheap, regardless of what system you're on.
Telltale games always come up real cheap. I think I ended up getting The Walking Dead for basically free. That's why I started playing it.
Well, they always have that big Telltale bundle that has like everything in it. Normally, it's like $180 every time there's an Xbox or a Steam sale or a PC or a PS4 sale. It's always like $60. So
$180.
Well, because most of it now at this point is like it's like Walking Dead Season 1, Walking Dead Season 2, Game of Thrones, these things that have been out for like 6 years.
Yeah.
So when they sell it as the bundle, they maybe take off like $20 or $30. But no one's realistically going to pay like $150 for,
No.
It is like 15 Telltale seasons. You get all the Minecraft, all that, but if you're looking for it, you can get it at a cheap discount price because they're always on sale with it.
Yeah. They seem to go in for all those monthly games with gold, PSN, PS Plus. I think they've been on there before. But yeah, Tales of the Borderlands. Ooh, it's fantastic. Often I was playing it and I thought, I don't know if I really need to be here. I'm not really doing anything.
Yeah, just making a movie.
But the story's great. And the comedy's great.
I have one last plug. Are we done talking about games? Do you have anything else you want to talk about?
That's it.
I just want to remind people right now, it's depending on where you're at in the world, the European Speedrun Assembly, the European Speedrunner Assembly is having their winter event. It's a laid-back stream, kind of like the Games Done Quick stuff that we've covered on this channel and on the 90skid.com before. But what it is, it's a bunch of speedrunners, and they're beating their favorite video games really fast, and they're raising money for Save the Children Foundation. The event right now is in Vaxjo, Sweden. Sorry if I butchered that. But if you want, you can go to twitch.tv/ESA Marathon and watch. It's just, people chilling. I think they're playing Super Mario 64 right now. You got Paper Mario coming up tonight. But until Friday night American EST time, they'll be playing games. So if you like speedruns, if you like, watching streams that are for a good cause, go check them out. It's really, really cool. A lot of, streamers and runners from different countries. They're all meeting up in Sweden. So it's a good time. It's like the European version of AGDQ. And if you're somebody who likes those GDQ events, but you kind of like when it's a little bit more PG-13 rated, that's what this event is for you. They allow their streamers to swear. They're playing games like Grand Theft Auto, Postal 2, South Park, The Fractured But Whole. So if you're looking for a little bit more of that adult content as far as your streamers and your speedrunners, they can provide that for you.
Yeah, and you can knock off maybe 10 games of your backlog of watching them in about a day.
Exactly. There you go. Just real quick. You're like, oh, now I don't need to play South Park. I already saw some guy beat it.
Yeah, in 20 minutes. All right, that's it. Thanks for joining. Check out 90skid.com for full written reviews of all the games that Matt talked about. We'll be back here tomorrow, 9:30 a.m. Eastern Time with the first episode of Metal Gear Solid 1. We're also playing Prey on the channel. Woo! Final Fantasy 12 is going to be ending in 3 days, and then we're going to be starting Final Fantasy 15. So
Matt, we should do some sort of, I don't know how we would do it, but there's like that A Way Out game coming up where it's only co-op.
Oh, yeah, the co-op
Maybe
game.
if we can both cop it on PS4, we could do that. Because it's only co-op, guys. It's called A Way Out. You play as these two guys. They escape from a prison. It's kind of an adventure game, a story-driven thing. But the idea is that you can only play it co-op, split screen or online. So that could be fun.
I'm very interested to see if that guy can pull it off.
Or generally speaking, I think Matt would do like a co-op stream. Yeah, that guy he's something else.
He doesn't like the Oscars. Okay.
No, definitely not.
We'll see you later. Bye for now.
Later, guys.